In 1996, 19-year-old Kristin Smart was at a college house party when she stumbled outside and passed out on the lawn. Kristin was unable to stand on her own and was helped up by two classmates who began to walk her home. At the same time, another classmate, Paul Flores, emerged from the shadows and offered to help, taking over and putting an arm around Kristin's waist. After a short walk and a brief exchange, Kristin was left alone with Paul, about 40 yards from her dorm. Kristin was never seen again. I'm Marina. With me, I have my two best friends, Colby and Laura, and this is Grim.
Goosebumps.
Wow.
I'm going to take you guys on a roller coaster ride with this one.
Oh boy, is it blood and feathers?
Yes, there will be blood and feathers when we mount the crest.
Oh no.
I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciate you for doing this episode, because I feel like with the verdict literally being rendered today, I won't say any more because I know nothing more. This is super timely, and I've been hearing about the case, but I don't know anything about what happened here.
Same.
For myself, like Kristin Smart, I think Elizabeth Smart,
Yep.
like the girl,
Right.
and that's
Exactly.
very different case, very different
Yeah.
circumstances.
It is.
So I am super excited that you're going to tell us about this case today.
And it was a little wild doing it because I finished my notes last night with no resolution.
That's crazy.
Like, I finished my notes last night and said, so sorry, bad news. I don't have an answer because the jury's still deliberating, but they reached a verdict today. So there is a resolution at the end of this case.
Fate.
Be what it may. Before we start discussing the case, though, we wanted to give you an exciting update. Grim is now on Patreon.
Woo!
Our podcast is free, as is our love for our gremlins. But if you'd like to subscribe to our Patreon to contribute to our wine fund, help us offset the costs of some sweet new equipment to bring you the crispest audio to your ear holes, and get some pretty sweet perks along the way, check it out at patreon.com and search Grim: a true crime podcast.
That's what you're listening to, in case you forgot.
I was like, Grim or the crispest audio in your ear holes?
Both of them.
We're like moderate crisp right now. We could be crisper.
We could.
We were crisp. This is crisper. We want to be crispest.
Crispiest. I want to be a crunch
crispiest?
bar, damn
We
it.
started out as Utz. Now we're Lay's. We're going for Cape Cod.
Cape Cod, baby.
Yes, kettle cooked Cape Cod.
Yes.
That's the sound that I want on my podcast.
Yes.
Yes.
Podcast.
So now on to the show. I want to start out giving a huge shout out to the podcast Your Own Backyard by Chris Lambert. That's where I got most of my information for today's episode. It was an incredibly well done investigative podcast. It was captivating, and it really made a difference in reigniting interest in Kristin's case. It may have never gone to trial without him starting the podcast and,
Wow,
and
really?
getting everybody, talking about the case again.
Because all I knew about, I had heard about that podcast. It's gotten rave reviews, and all I knew about it was he was in the courtroom, right? So I just assumed I don't know how it got there. I just assumed he was already there, so I didn't know any of that.
He was in the courtroom,
Wow.
and the police were even giving him some information along the way, and people started coming forward and giving him more information
Wow.
that was being passed on to police. So it really made a huge difference. And if you want a deep dive into this case, as well as a week by week recap of the trial, I highly recommend that you check it out. I had to fight the urge to write down basically a transcript of his podcast because I just want to use every piece of information, and knowledge is power. But I fought the urge. I also found yesterday that he has live tweeted the entire trial, and I just wanted to read the entire Twitter feed, and time did not allow for that, which is probably for the best because I'm at 17 pages. I would have been at 73. So
You don't want to be like me with the Aparo case of 45 pages.
I did not write a dissertation on Kristin Smart.
Next time.
You're only getting a master's, not a PhD.
Sorry. So I'm going to start talking about Kristin. We'll start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start. This is literally in my notes.
Of course.
Kristin Denise Smart was born on February 20th, 1977 in West Germany to Stan and Denise Smart, who were both teachers to children of military personnel. The Smarts returned to the States while Kristin was still a baby, and her mother said she cried a lot. They found out she was allergic to milk, and once they removed that from her diet, her mother said she turned into a baby that you wanted to keep. Which I can very much relate to that because my son is allergic to milk, which we figured out. And I suspect that my daughter may have been too, but we didn't know and did not remove it. And she cried a lot.
But you still went back for the son. You went back for number 2.
Mistakes were made. Just kidding. I love my son. But yeah, we still made that decision. Kristin had a younger brother and sister. And when Kristin was a child, the family moved to Stockton, California. Kristin was athletic. She liked to swim and play volleyball. She was described as warm and quiet. She was the last one to start a fight and the first person to invite friends on vacation with her family or invite friends over her house for sleepovers. Kristin graduated from the local high school in Stockton in 1995, and she spent the summer as a camp counselor and lifeguard at Camp Mokuleia in Hawaii.
Oh, damn.
That sounds nice.
What a great summer gig for somebody to have.
Right? So she spent her free time surfing there, which sounds
nice.
wonderful.
Cool.
Kristin planned to start college in the fall of 1995. She was accepted to UC Santa Barbara and had paid a deposit for a dorm room, but then she decided she wanted to go somewhere closer to home. When she returned from Oahu, she moved from Stockton to San Luis Obispo to attend California Polytechnic State University, also known as Cal Poly. Kristin was originally going to study architecture, but she later switched to communication studies with the goal of traveling the world as a reporter.
Jeez.
Because Kristin enrolled late, she had to live off campus in an apartment and was on a waiting list for a dorm room. When she went back to school after the winter break, she was able to move into Muir Hall on campus. Kristin was busy with school, and she also worked as many hours as she could as a lifeguard, sometimes getting up at 4:30 a.m. to go to work for 5 or 6.
Oof.
No, thank you.
Yeah. I know that life. Not for nearly as glamorous of a reason, but I used to open Dunkin' Donuts, and you would have to get there at 4 a.m. And there's no function in my body whatsoever at 4 a.m.
That's too early.
It's too early.
I can't believe you managed that.
I may not have gone to sleep before some shifts. I might have pulled an all-nighter and just stayed awake until 11 or 1 o'clock the next day. I mean, that's easier for me. But there was once a time where I did get up very early in the morning.
At least you were surrounded by coffee.
I think that's why it worked, because it was in my pores. I could not get enough of the caffeine.
In the pre-cell phone era, Kristin called her parents every Sunday from her dorm room to catch up. On Friday, May 24th, 1996, Kristin made an unscheduled call to her parents and left a message that she had good news and that she'd talk to them on Sunday. Apparently, Kristin had been concerned about a grade because her professor lost her exam and they'd given her an incomplete. They had found it and she had ultimately gotten a good grade, and she was excited to share that information with her parents.
I realize this is not pertinent to the podcast, but what? Why would that be her fault if the professor lost the exam?
I think they thought she didn't turn it in, so they gave her an incomplete on it, and she said, I did turn it in, that you just lost it.
I don't like that.
I'm stressed for her having to deal with that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
After she made the call to her parents, Kristin got ready to go out for the night. She got dressed in a gray crop top, black Roxy board shorts, and red Puma shoes. She left her room that night at Muir Hall with her close friend, Margarita, who lived in the room next to hers. Margarita wanted to stay in and study for a biology final that she was stressed about, but Kristin had insisted and convinced her to go out. Kristin left the room that night with just the clothes on her back. She didn't bring her ID or any money, and she didn't even have her room key, which she had previously lost. In the hallway of Muir Hall, Kristin and Margarita ran into 2 other girls who were also looking to go out. The group flagged down a guy they knew in a truck and asked him to drive them around to find an off-campus party. The girls ended up at an off-campus house where they watched some guys play video games and drank 1 beer. Kristin called it a dud and wanted to leave.
Fair.
The group left and were driving around looking for another party, but to no avail, as a lot of the students had left for the long Memorial Day weekend. Kristin and Margarita were dropped off in the area where the off-campus frat houses were, and they walked around some. At that point, Margarita had enough and she wanted to go home. They sort of pleaded with each other, please, just 1 more street. No, I want to go home, come on. Margarita was steadfast in her desire to go home for the evening, but she knew Kristin didn't have her room key. It was before 10, so Margarita knew if she hurried, she could get in the dorm before it was locked for the night. So she gave Kristin her key. Kristin tucked Margarita's key in her sock, and Margarita said when she left Kristin, she was sober. Around 10, about 1/10 of a mile from where she split off from Margarita, Kristin found a birthday party being thrown by members of the Kappa Chi fraternity. When she got there, it wasn't a big party. There were only about 12 to 15 people. Towards the end of the night, there were about 30 to 45. A fellow Cal Poly freshman, Paul Flores, was also in attendance at the party. At least one person said that Paul was staring at Kristin during the party and it made them uncomfortable, and he told another partygoer that he thought Kristin was good looking. At one point during the party, Kristin walked over to a fellow student named Trevor Belter, and she said, "Hi, I'm Roxy," and just started making out with him.
Oh, my goodness.
She grabbed his hand and brought him to the bathroom. Trevor was pumped because he thought he was about to get laid, but it turned out she was likely just using him to make another guy at the party jealous. Kristin said she had to use the bathroom and kicked him out.
Nice.
Poor Trevor.
Yeah, unfortunate ending for Trevor. When Trevor came out of the bathroom, Paul stepped in his path and said, "What I would like to know is what you did with her in the bathroom." Trevor was nervous, thinking it was Kristin's boyfriend, and assured him nothing happened, and Trevor said that Paul looked relieved. Trevor ran into Kristin again out in the backyard, and he said Kristin was really inebriated at that point, but he also said that she never smelled like alcohol. The two were talking, and he said Kristin pulled Trevor in for another kiss, but he pushed her back. Kristin turned around and walked into the house, and Trevor didn't see her again that night. Tim Davis, another student at the Kappa Chi party, saw Kristin talking to Paul on several occasions throughout the night. At one point, he heard a loud crash, and when he looked over, Paul and Kristin were both on the floor. At some point, Kristin went outside and laid down on the ground between the party house and the neighbor's house. Several people saw her lying there, and a few offered to help get her home, but she told them to leave her alone, and her speech was very slurred. Tim Davis was in charge of getting everyone out of the house that night, and when he went outside, he saw Kristin lying in the grass. He told her that she had to leave, and she said that she was cold and just wanted to go home. Kristin needed help standing up, and Tim decided that he would walk Kristin and his friend Cheryl Anderson back to the dorms. Tim and Cheryl started to walk Kristin back when Paul emerged from the shadows and offered to help. Tim said Paul took control of Kristin and said, "I've got her." Tim broke off from the group, and Cheryl, Kristin, and Paul continued towards the dorms. Paul stopped several times, telling Cheryl, "You can go ahead, I got this." The group ultimately split up at the intersection of Perimeter and Grand, about 40 yards from Kristin's dorm. But before Cheryl left, she said that Paul asked her for a kiss, which she refused.
Weird.
He then asked her for a hug, which she also refused.
Yeah.
Very weird.
The last time Cheryl saw Paul and Kristin, they were walking towards Paul's dorm building around 2 to 2:30 a.m.
Will you tell us later where Paul's dorm is in relation to Kristin's?
The dorms were close to each other, basically adjacent. I can post a picture of the map on our Instagram, but it wouldn't be so weird if he was headed in the direction of his dorm versus her dorm because they're sort of in a general area together.
Okay, that's exactly what I was asking.
So he's not going too far out of his way to help her out.
No.
I do have one other question. Did she know him before this night? Like, were they friends at all? Because it seems like he was very captivated by her at the party, which Laura and I, our faces were kind of like, ooh, this is concerning, but it's because we know you are telling us about a case that unfortunately ends with this girl disappearing. So we automatically think something like sinister is happening. But I think if you take it out of that vacuum that we're viewing it in, he just kind of seems like maybe she was a really beautiful girl that he wanted to get with. She was a little buzzed, so he thought maybe her guard was going to be down, and he tried to take advantage of the situation, which is not exactly honorable, but it happens all the time, right? Like it's like a typical Saturday night at a college.
Yep.
So he said he didn't know her prior to this. Other people said that he did.
Oh.
So
Okay.
we'll get into more of that later. Kristin was supposed to sleep in Margarita's room that night, but she never returned. Crystal, Kristin's roommate, was off campus on Friday, but she came back on Saturday and saw Kristin's belongings were spread on her bed like they had been the night before. When Kristin didn't spend Saturday night in her room either, Crystal started to ask around and found out that no one had seen her since Friday night. On Sunday, one of her neighbors, Jennifer, called the San Luis Obispo police, who directed her to the Cal Poly campus police. The Cal Poly police said it was not unusual for a student to not be on campus for Memorial Day weekend, and that if she was still missing on Tuesday, she should call back. But that seemed so unlikely because Kristin's roommate, Crystal, confirmed that none of her personal belongings were missing, including her ID and money. So where could she have gone?
Right.
And you generally have an idea if someone's gone for the entire weekend or not. You'd think you'd mention that to your roommate.
You'd think, but this is also a pre-cell phone era.
I was just thinking, what year are we in? We're in 95 or 96. So there's
96.
Cell phones, I think, in some capacity.
I think that the fact that there are no cell phones actually makes for me even more reason why someone would say whether or not they were going to be there for the weekend. So very strange.
But it's also possible if you go out for the night to a party and you meet someone.
True.
Just things happen. Jennifer called the San Luis Obispo police and the Cal Poly campus police again on Monday. Cal Poly police called the Smart family to see if Kristin went home for the weekend, but they said she wasn't there and hadn't visited them. She'd also missed her weekly Sunday call. The police just figured she must have gone somewhere else, which, if that was their assumption, why even call in the first place?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you either confirm that she's there, or when she's not there, you're like, well, she probably just went somewhere else.
Yeah.
So waste of time. Kristin failed to show up for her classes on Tuesday, May 28th, at which point a missing persons report was finally taken 4 days after Kristin attended the Kappa Chi party. On May 28th, the same day, the Cal Poly police conducted interviews. They talked to Tim Davis and Cheryl Anderson, who were two of the three people last seen with Kristin before she disappeared. Tim explained that he found Kristin on the lawn and was helping to take her home when Paul stepped in. Cheryl told the police that she knew Paul prior to the party. She said that she found him creepy and that she and her friends called him Chester the Molester.
Oh. Not a great nickname.
No. She said that a few months prior, Paul had tried to forcefully kiss one of Cheryl's friends at a party. That same day, wait, I have to pause for a second. I wrote Paul had tried to forcefully kill one of Cheryl's friends at a party, which is like, that's quite a typo.
It's very aggressive.
That's a whole nother story.
In reality, he softly killed them.
That same day, Paul was interviewed by the Cal Poly police. Paul told police that on May 24th, he got off work, went to his dorm, played a game of pool, had dinner, 2 beers, and then was headed to his sister's. He said he stumbled onto the party at Crandall Way, and while there, Kristin walked up to him and introduced herself as Roxy. Paul said she appeared to be intoxicated, and that was the only contact he had with her at the party. When he went outside around 2:30, he saw Cheryl and Kristin and helped them. He said Kristin appeared cold, so he rubbed her shoulders to warm her up and said it wasn't sexual at all. He told an officer that Kristin was having trouble walking home, so he was helping her. He told police that he split up with Kristin in between their dorm buildings and said that she walked uphill on her own without help to get back to her own dorm. He said when he got back to his dorm, he laid down on his bed, but he wasn't feeling well, so he threw up in his mouth and then went to the bathroom to throw up again. He went to bed, took a shower the next morning. The cops asked Paul what he thought happened that night, and he said he believed she was dead.
Oh. Well, okay. I have so many reactions.
I thought you were going to say you have so many questions already. It's going to get worse.
I have so many reactions. Well, I guess they are questions, like why he needed to tell the detail that he threw up in his mouth before throwing up in the bathroom doesn't seem relevant. And also the Roxy thing, was it Trevor that she said that too, actually?
She
Very
did.
interesting.
She had a high school friend named Roxy, but she was also wearing Roxy board shorts that night. So they sort of hypothesized that she was going for like a free spirit, different identity kind of vibe that evening in calling herself Roxy.
Yeah.
I've done it.
Yeah.
It's fun. Get to not be you for a while. I won't tell you what alias I use. It's not Roxy.
Very interesting.
Is it Regina Phalanges?
It is not. No, it's not that good. I do have one thought though. So Tim Davis, right?
Yep.
He's saying, I found Kristin in the grass. She couldn't get up. I helped her. Even Paul is seeming to indicate like she needs assistance walking home, but then he's going to try to tell the police that she walked uphill by herself without help.
I had the same thought.
That was the part that seemed very strange to me.
Yeah, I mean, the police sort of picked up on that too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thought that
good.
was a little suspicious. Yeah, it didn't sound right because she needed assistance getting back to where they got to. And then she just walked back fine.
Good enough.
Yeah, no
Close
problem.
enough.
And why would he just be like, yeah, she's probably dead? I would be more like, oh my God, she didn't get back inside. Like, is she lost outside somewhere? Did somebody else pick her up? I don't think I'd jump right to, nah, she's dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, very strange response.
Yeah.
At one point during the interview, Paul seemingly slipped up and said, when we got back to my dorm, which wouldn't make sense had they split up earlier.
He's like, me, myself, and I got back to my dorm.
Me and my multiple personalities.
Me and the vomit in my mouth.
Yeah.
Basically, Paul is no H.H. Holmes. He can't keep his lies straight.
Okay.
The Cal Poly police were suspicious and asked whether Paul was attracted to Kristin. Paul denied that, and he said he wasn't attracted to or interested in her at all, which seems untrue based upon statements made by other witnesses. The officers asked Paul about a black eye that he had, which he said that he got when he was elbowed during a basketball game that he had played with friends that Monday, including a friend named Jeremy. Another Cal Poly officer who was involved with the interview with Paul wrote in his report that he could see Paul's heart beating out of his chest, which was in contrast to dozens of other people he had interviewed. The police also noted that Paul had scratches on the backs of his hands and what appeared to be rug burn on his knees. A week later, Cal Poly police talked to Jeremy about the alleged basketball game, and Jeremy said that Paul had the black eye on Sunday when he saw him. He remembered because he said he specifically asked Paul about it, and Paul said he didn't know how he got it. He just woke up with it.
Drunken night of fun, shit happens.
Fun for him.
Yeah, black eyes. That's casual.
Yeah.
As luck would have it, there is documented proof of Paul's black eye. At the time of Kristin's disappearance, there was a warrant out for Paul's arrest.
What?
Paul had previously been arrested for a DUI and his license was suspended. A few months later, Paul was caught driving with a suspended license, which was a violation of his probation, and he was given a court date, which he failed to attend. On May 27th, the police went to his home and spoke to his father, Ruben Flores. Ruben said that Paul was not home, but that he would bring him by the station later in the day. He kept his word, and Paul's booking photo from May 27th shows his fresh black eye.
And that was Mondays, the 27th, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. So before he even would have had a chance to play the basketball game. So debunked before it really even got anywhere.
Correct. Paul was the last person seen with Kristin before she disappeared, and he was completely unaccounted for from when he left with Kristin around 2 to 2:30 until 6 p.m. the following day when he went to see a movie with some friends.
I think you could actually hear my jaw
I think so,
open
too.
with that. Wow.
Paul said that he spoke with a student when he got back to the dorm, and he said he also spoke to another student when he took a shower that next morning. They said that's fine, and he was asked to provide the names of those students, which he just never did. Paul's roommate was out of town from Friday until Tuesday, so Paul had 3 full days alone in his dorm room. So it's safe to say that Paul was a person of interest right from the start. On June 10th, Cal Poly police secured Paul's dorm room at Santa Lucia Hall. This was 16 days.
I was going to say.
After Kristin was last seen, and was after Paul and his roommate moved out of the dorms for the summer.
Are you...
None of Paul's property was still in the residence hall, and janitorial crews had come in and thoroughly cleaned the room.
Oh my God. Why even bother at that point in time?
Really?
Why not do it sooner
Right?
is always my question.
And even if you managed to find something, how could you ever prove anything? So not only are you probably not going to find anything, but you can never prove. You can be like, oh, it was the janitor. Come
Right.
on.
I feel like in a lot of these cases, people are like, let's not waste public funds and do this sooner. But ultimately, I feel like 9 times out of 10, it would end up costing less if you investigated faster because you would collect the evidence up front rather than missing out on whatever was in that room that we'll never know about.
Right. I just don't know why it took that long when they talked to Paul right away.
Right.
Yeah.
And Paul made inconsistent, suspicious statements.
Right.
Like, I don't know how that wasn't enough right from the start to at least secure his dorm room.
That's what I was going to ask, is sometimes I know it can take a while to get search warrants
Yeah.
and all that, but it doesn't sound like it would be difficult, but who knows?
It shouldn't take 16 days. So in Paul's last interview with investigators on June 19th, his story changed, and he said that Kristin was walking just fine after the party, which was not smart because that's not what everyone else
Right,
said,
right.
and he's changing his story. The police discussed his black eye again and confronted him with the inconsistency after their discussions with Jeremy, and Paul changed his story. He said he got the black eye while working on his truck at 2 a.m. that Monday the 27th, which is still after Jeremy said he saw it that Sunday the 26th. He said when he was trying to remove the stereo from his truck, he slammed his head on the steering wheel. When they asked him why he had lied the first time, Paul said it wasn't a lie, it was just a little fib, a little white lie, because he didn't want police officers to think he was a klutz. Maybe pick a story and stick to it.
Yeah.
What I'm more on is that he's like, oh, at 2 a.m. I was changing out the stereo in my car. I'm like, yes, I too often do that at 2 a.m.
Yeah.
That's a great time. The lighting is perfect. There's no other people like that. No, nobody's doing that at 2 a.m.
You're a busy college student.
Yeah, I guess.
You've got stuff to do during the day, so you gotta work on your car at night.
But that would explain why he hit his head on the steering wheel.
'Cause he couldn't see.
Exactly.
But talk about priorities. You would rather give an inconsistent statement to the police and be a suspect for murder as opposed to them thinking that you're a klutz.
I'd rather be a klutz.
I would as well. Paul abruptly walked out of that interview before it concluded and said he wouldn't answer any more questions. He said he had to go clean up some concrete at his mom's house.
Okay, I feel like Paul is like using, remember like cootie catchers, like the things that you did with your hands, like you pick a number, pick a color. I literally feel like he's doing that to put together a story. Like these are things that don't make sense. Yes, exactly. And he's like, okay, 2, concrete. Yes, blue, mom. And he's like, I was there.
Basketball game, no truck, no, I woke up with it.
Steering wheel.
Yeah.
2 a.m. Yeah, but what?
He's having a hard time getting his story together. On June 26th, amid criticism of how the case was being handled, the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office took over as the lead investigators from the Cal Poly Police. Within 3 days, the Sheriff's Office organized a thorough search of the Cal Poly campus with the help of almost 400 volunteers and the California Rescue Dog Association, also known as CARDA. CARDA is an organization that has trained dogs to alert to the scent of human remains, which includes the presence of 424 unique chemicals that begin being released from a decomposing human body just a few seconds after death.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
I love dogs.
Blown away by that. The dogs are clutch, man.
I think the reason they always bring in the dogs to do the scent work is that, you know, I think of myself as having a bloodhound's nose, but my Bernese Mountain Dog can smell 1,000 to 10,000 times more than I can with my nose.
That's just so wild.
It's insane.
It's wild. On June 29th, they brought in the cadaver dogs, and they were brought into the Cal Poly dorms on campus. In an effort to avoid bias or claims that the handlers signaled the dogs in some ways, the handlers had no details about the case. The dogs checked several buildings on campus, but only alerted in one. A Labrador alerted to room 128 in Santa Lucia Hall. That lab was led out of the building, and a border collie was brought in. The handler was not told about the prior alert by the Labrador, and the border collie stopped and scratched at room 128 to be let in. The process was repeated with a second border collie who barked outside of room 128. The dogs were walked through the other 2 floors of the building and did not alert in any other areas.
Border collies are super freaking smart too, so I would 100% trust them.
Each of the dogs was allowed to enter into room 128 at separate times, and all 3 dogs alerted to the corner of the mattress on the left side of the room. The cover from that mattress had a tiny light brown stain on it about the size of a dime. Again, in an effort to avoid claims of bias, the team made some adjustments. The left side mattress and box spring were removed from the room, and a 4th dog, a boxer, was brought into Santa Lucia Hall. The boxer alerted to room 128 and once let inside, showed interest and a change of behavior in the same spot on the left side of the room on the corner of the bed frame where the mattress used to be.
Dogs are so amazing.
They're so smart.
Wow.
The boxer also alerted to the handset of the telephone and the wastebasket in the room. Again, to account for all forms of bias, the wastebasket was removed from the room and placed in the hallway with several other identical wastebaskets from neighboring rooms. The boxer was brought out into the hallway and again alerted on the wastebasket from room 128. I'm sure you've guessed at this point that the bed on the left side of room 128 belonged to Paul Flores.
Yep.
So let's pause here to talk a little bit more about Paul. Paul went to Arroyo Grande High School and graduated in 1995. One of his high school classmates said Paul was always the guy that showed up at parties uninvited. His nickname was Scary Paul.
Paul's not getting great nicknames from people
But
at
that
all.
that one doesn't even rhyme.
No.
No,
At least it was his real name, though.
That one is very low effort.
it is, yeah. But they said it was, he was called Scary Paul, but most people at the time would just say he's weird but harmless. Mm-hmm. When she heard that he might be involved with Kristin's disappearance, it was one of those I knew it situations. She said if anyone was going to be involved in a disappearance or homicide, she could see that it would be Paul. Paul was that guy. Almost everyone described him as creepy. One woman said you wouldn't want to be alone in a room with him and you wouldn't let your friends be drunk around him. Former coworker said he was that guy that would go up behind women and rub their shoulders uninvited.
Oh, I hate that.
The worst.
He was a freshman at Cal Poly in the fall of 1995, like Kristin, but he was a bad student. He had a combined GPA of 0.6, and apparently the only class he passed in his freshman year was a bowling elective.
You have to work hard to have a 0.6. Well,
Really?
Like, that's like effort to fail.
Right? You just do nothing.
You have to just avoid eye contact with your professors on campus.
Yeah.
You can't even make eye contact with them.
No, you turn in absolutely nothing. You show up to no class. But he probably did poorly because he spent his nights milling about, creeping people out at parties.
Yeah, that's true.
In October, Paul knocked on the door of a Halloween party and asked if he could join in. They let him in, and the women quickly realized that he was that guy. The women told the men that were there that he was making them uncomfortable, so Paul was asked to leave. He said no. They had to agree to put the keg outside with him to get him out of the house, and then they locked the door behind them.
Oh, hell no.
An hour later, the group was in one of the bedrooms when they noticed was that Paul was standing outside, hiding in the tall weeds, watching them. And when he was caught, they said he just stared at them and laughed loudly.
I see why he's called Scary Paul. Mm-hmm. Also can see why what happened off recording was Colby's dishwasher opened and we thought the house was on fire with all the steam. But I made a face because I'm facing it, and then Colby looked and made a face, and Marina said that she thought it was a person, and now I see why.
Yes.
You
Right.
had that in your head because that's
People creeping.
terrifying.
People creeping.
I don't like that.
I don't like people creeping. In December of 1995, a female Cal Poly student called the campus police because Paul was drunk outside their apartment and peeping into their window at 1 a.m.
No, Paul.
The police arrived and told Paul to leave.
Go work on your car, Paul.
Right? That's car time.
In February is when Paul was pulled over for speeding and blew a .13, and that's when he was charged with DUI and had his license suspended. That started the chain of events leading to the booking photo showing his black eye.
That's a lot. Mm-hmm. Wow.
On March 3rd, a group of female students reported receiving weeks of phone calls with silent hang-ups. They believed it was Paul because it was the same group of girls that he was peeping on in December. 1 week after Kristin's disappearance, Paul showed up at a high school after prom party. The students in attendance didn't know Kristin was missing, and they didn't know Paul was connected, but they still thought it was weird he was there since he was in college. One of the girls who was at the party said he approached her group with a Tupperware pitcher of mixed drinks and was trying to get the other girls to drink it. They all declined. Later, he asked the girl to go for a walk with him, and she thankfully said no.
I'm reacting to the Tupperware like it's gross. Like I didn't drink jungle juice out of giant tub that was plastic, but it was not from a guy that was very creepy that likely drugged
called Chester the molester.
No, it was made with love by your best friend. Yes. The gin bucket.
Oh my God, the gin bucket in Hill. Yep. Mm-hmm.
They described his behavior as predatory.
Yes. Yeah.
So now that you know a little bit more about what the police are dealing with, again, not surprising that Paul's a person of interest from the start. On July 12th, the sheriff's office spoke to Paul's roommate, Derek Say, who I mentioned was gone over Memorial Day weekend. Derek said Paul had told him about the night of May 25th, which it was the night of May 24th into May 25th.
Okay. That was Friday into Saturday of
Yes.
Memorial Day weekend. Okay.
Yep. He said that Paul told him he walked with Kristin all the way to the door of her dorm at Muir Hall and then went back to his dorm in Santa Lucia, which is again inconsistent with what he told police. Derek said he joked with Paul because he was the last one that had been seen with her. He said, "Hey, what did you do with her?" Paul joked back and said, "She's at my house eating lunch with my mom."
I'm getting like Weekends with Bernie vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Corpse Bride, actually.
I'm getting like chained up in the basement vibes.
Yes.
With your mom making you peanut butter sandwiches.
Yeah.
Yeah. In July, the sheriff's office conducted a search of Ruben Flores' home in Arroyo Grande. The sheriffs found 4 articles about Kristin's disappearance in the house, one hidden under Paul's mattress. Paul's name wasn't yet released to the public, so it isn't like he was keeping the article as a memento. No evidence was found that would indicate Kristin's whereabouts, but they did not bring in any cadaver dogs or a forensic team, and they didn't search any cars. The sheriff said they were only doing a visual inspection for items belonging to Kristin, like Margarita's dorm key. The police did not search the home of Susan Flores, who is Paul's mother, who was not living with Ruben or Paul at the time. Susan was living in a rental property on Branch Street, which went unsearched for the entire summer of '96. After Kristin went missing, witnesses saw Paul and Ruben doing concrete work in the backyard of that property, including constructing planter boxes out of concrete, one measuring 6 foot by 3 foot.
Nope, you don't need a planter that big.
We're going to talk a little bit about the Branch Street property. On August 28th, Susan listed that property for rent. It was rented by a couple named Mary and Joe Lassiter, who moved in on October 1st. Mary said that when they moved in, there was a metal trash can that was next to the shed, and Ruben specifically said, "Don't use that trash can, we're going to come get it," and the next day he came and got it. That October, Mary was cleaning her car in the driveway when she noticed something shiny. She found a single woman's earring with a dark red smudge on it. She picked it up carefully and put it in a bag, thinking that it might be important.
Go, Mary.
Yeah.
The Lassiters turned the earring over to a San Luis Obispo detective. Mary said that when they moved in every night, they could hear what sounded like a watch alarm going off at 4:20 in the morning in the backyard. Mary said her and her mother went out in the backyard and were on their hands and knees trying to find the source of this noise, but they could never find it.
Oh my God.
As an aside, you may recall that Kristin's mother had said that she used to get up around 4:30 to get to the pool because she was working as a lifeguard for the 5 and 6 a.m. shift as a newbie. Mary said eventually the watch battery died and stopped going off. In November, the Smarts got word that Paul had enlisted in the Navy. To keep him from basically fleeing, on November 26th, they filed a $40 million wrongful death lawsuit against him. Paul was scheduled to attend the Navy apprentice school on December 10th, but he was rejected from the Navy on December 3rd as a result of the suit being filed.
I was going to ask, I wouldn't think the Navy would want anything to do with you in this situation.
No. Nope. The Smart family was represented by attorney James Murphy, who subpoenaed several people in conjunction with the lawsuit. He subpoenaed Cheryl Anderson, who had nothing new to add beyond what she told police. He subpoenaed Tim Davis, who refused to be deposed. He also subpoenaed the Lassiters, where James Murphy and the Smarts first learned about the earring found by Mary Lassiter. James Murphy put in a request with the sheriff's office to see the earring, but they never responded. In March 1997, the Smarts lost their patience and went down to the sheriff's office asking to view the earring. It was at this point that they were told the earring was misplaced. But really, the earring was never even booked into evidence.
What did they do with it?
Someone at the sheriff's office did a, quote, visual inspection and deemed that it wasn't Kristin's.
And so they threw it out?
Presumably.
Oh my God.
Mary Lassiter was able to go to the store and find an almost identical earring, which she said had a turquoise gem. So it wasn't an exact replica, but she was saying the one that she had looked very similar with a turquoise gem. The earring bought by Mary matches the necklace being worn by Kristin in the photo on her missing poster.
Oh my God.
All right, so it's probably like a 3-piece set kind of a thing that you'd buy. Ugh.
The sheriff's department denied that there was any turquoise in the earring that they had been given, which Mary insisted was a lie. So people sort of had conspiracy theories that the sheriff's office was trying to cover something up.
Guys,
probably their own mistakes.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm going to say it right now. If you turn anything over to the police, take a picture of it before you turn it over. Take a picture, take a video of it, show it to other people. I don't trust anybody in general, but like this is just adding to my distrust.
I mean, mistakes happen too. It's just incredibly unfortunate when you have so little to go on, like a critical piece of evidence, and it's just gone.
I also think it's almost like confirmation bias. We're hearing this in a murder case or a missing persons case, and there are probably for every one of these 100 cases where it really didn't matter, and just like in the beginning, somebody wasn't missing; they really were away for the weekend.
Right.
So I know that is definitely my reaction in this too. Is like it's so obvious. How could they not? But I have to imagine there's 100 cases for every one of these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't talk about the truly successful solved cases. They get solved quickly. They're not really talked about in the news, and you just don't hear about them. Because the Lasseters cooperated with James Murphy and the Smart family during their depositions, Susan Flores moved to evict them from the Branch Street property. But the Lasseters had 30 days to vacate the property. So in the meantime, they gave James Murphy's office permission to search whatever they wanted on the property.
Good for them.
On March 3rd, 1997, James Murphy's office organized a search of the Branch Street house with cadaver dogs and a geologist. The dogs reacted to the backyard where the metal garbage can Ruben was originally concerned about used to be. The dogs showed a noticeable change in behavior but did not fully alert. The geologist found some anomalies underneath the concrete on the west side of the yard, but was 85 to 90% sure it was natural. The geologist said that was his first search for a human body, and he didn't have the proper equipment with him. He was troubled by the presence of leftover concrete from work done by Ruben and Paul, and noted that there were stains from dirt on the side of the house that showed that dirt had been piled up there. After she evicted the Lasseters, Susan moved into that house. Denise Smart sent Susan a collage of pictures of Kristin from birth to college with a letter begging her to help her find her Kristin.
Oh my God. So she's trying to appeal to her, like mother to mother, like help me find my baby.
Oh my God, that's heartbreaking.
Susan returned the package with a note that said, "If I wanted to see pictures of Kristin, I would have asked for them. Look at them yourself."
What a bitch.
Yeah, that's cold.
Wow.
Kristin's family was desperate to find her, and the community banded together, putting up missing posters in San Luis Obispo and Arroyo Grande. Ruben Flores was actually seen going around town tearing down the missing posters.
Of course he was.
On at least one occasion, he also referred to Kristin as a dirty fucking slut, which is incredibly harsh language about someone you've never met and don't know.
That's what I was going to say too, is none of this is implying Paul did anything.
Right.
It's only pleading with whomever to get Kristin back. So it's not like it's a public attack on him and his son. It just almost proves guilt.
Yeah.
It doesn't look good.
No.
It does not look good. As part of this lawsuit, the Smarts subpoenaed all the law enforcement reports and files, but the Cal Poly Police, Sheriff's Office, and DA fought the request due to the ongoing criminal nature of the investigation. On November 14th, 1997, James Murphy noticed Paul Flores' deposition in connection with the Smarts lawsuit. Paul refused to answer a single question, citing the Fifth Amendment on the advice of his attorney, which was the nail in the coffin for the case. Mm-hmm. The Smarts were going to be unable to proceed with their wrongful death suit while the criminal investigation was pending. And in the meantime, Paul continued his concerning behavior. In 1997, Paul was hired as an inaugural member of an Outback Steakhouse in Irvine to work in the kitchen. His coworker Kenzie described him as a loner with a bad stutter. She said he seemed genuine and they would hang out after work every now and then. She knew he didn't have a license, so she would take him home from time to time.
That's very nice of her.
It is. She said whenever he drank, he got really weird. He wouldn't stutter when he was drunk, but he'd get very affectionate. She said he would constantly talk about how he was a virgin, which was weird. Paul would try to hit on her in the car rides home. He'd just say, give me one kiss. And she was just like, okay, get out, basically treating him like a toddler.
Right.
One night, he would just not stop, and he wouldn't get out of her car. And it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, if you just give me one kiss, I'll go inside. She said it got to the point where she just said, I will walk you to the door if you will get out of my car. So they went up to his sister's apartment. She walked him to the door, and when he opened the door, he picked her up, carried her inside, shut the apartment door, and locked it behind them. The lights were off, and she said he didn't turn the lights on for an uncomfortable amount of time.
Gross.
She said, you better turn some lights on right now or I will scream. And she said he finally turned them on.
Oh, my God.
She said after that, he still tried to get her to go to his bedroom, and she was like, no way, and left.
I'm glad she made it out of there.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Kenzie didn't think Paul was dangerous at the time, but in April of 98, 2020 did a special on Kristin's disappearance, and it featured Paul. And Kenzie and her boyfriend, who also worked at Outback, were so creeped out.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Kenzie eventually got a job at a new restaurant, which Paul then applied to, but he didn't get hired. Even though he didn't get the job, he would circle the restaurant on his bike when she was working.
Oh, my God. I am 100% sure that he knew that Kristin was at that party.
Predator.
100% sure. Yep.
Predator. The sheriff's office continued to work Kristin's case behind the scenes. Kristin's case was never declared cold, and I imagine that based on the evidence, the theory was always that Paul Flores was involved, but they just had to prove it. In early 1999, the FBI interviewed over 1,000 former Cal Poly students and sifted through dirt under the Student Academic Services building. The FBI combed the campus, but no new evidence was found. On June 19, 2000, at 8 a.m., sheriff's investigators and FBI evidence response team members showed up to Susan's Branch Street home with a new warrant. The 22-page affidavit search warrant concluded that reasonable cause existed to believe that Kristin Smart was dead, that Kristin's body was in the backyard of Susan Flores' home, and that Paul Flores was responsible for or had knowledge of Kristin's disappearance and or death. The warrant listed facts and conclusions drawn from the current evidence, including that Paul was the last person seen with Kristin, Paul's stories about the walk back to the dorms and his black eye were inconsistent, cadaver dogs alerted to Paul's dorm room, Susan's neighbor saw Paul and Ruben doing construction work after Kristin's death, the Lassiters found the earring, the anomalies noted by the geologist, and the cadaver dog showing interest in an area of that backyard. Investigators searched the house and the property for 9 hours. They used more advanced ground-penetrating radar and determined that it wasn't necessary to dig up any of the concrete, even though the warrant would have allowed it. When they left the property, the warrant expired and they would need new reasonable cause to search the property again. Based on their search, Kristin's body wasn't there.
I don't like how you phrased that, first of all. And second, why wouldn't you just get into the, break up the concrete? Why wouldn't you just do it while you're there?
Because they didn't want to have to put it back together.
It's concrete. It's not that hard. Not that I can do it, but
You just pour some shit down.
yeah, whatever. You make it level. It's fine.
They did have advanced technology. This ground-penetrating radar is this little device that sends waves into the ground and comes back, and they're able to determine whether there's anomalies in the ground based on that. And based upon the evidence they got back, they didn't feel that it was necessary to dig up any of the concrete.
It does apply to concrete, that technology. You're raising your eyebrows. I don't like that. Okay, I'll let you continue.
I believe that it does. I believe that it does apply to concrete.
If that's true, then I do actually. That does actually make sense.
Right.
Okay. All right. I'm just mad.
Kristin Smart was declared legally dead on May 25th, 2002. We're going to jump forward to 2011. Ian Parkinson became the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff, and he requested a complete review of all of the physical evidence taken in Smart's case.
Yes, Ian.
On September 6th, 2016, Sheriff Parkinson announced that a new lead strongly suggested that Kristin's remains may be buried on a hillside on the Cal Poly campus near the Cal Poly P that had been searched by about 400 volunteers in June 96. A joint sheriff's office FBI excavation took place over 5 days, and they found bones, but they were later identified as animal bones.
Okay.
You guys are along for this ride.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been for the police and the family. With so little to go on, they can't ignore any leads. but they're essentially on a wild goose chase at this point.
And they're not, though. It's like there's so much evidence, and I believe, this is where I don't know my law, circumstantial evidence for Paul, right? They, aside from, does the cadaver, do the cadaver dogs alerting count as circumstantial or physical?
They do, but they just didn't feel that it was enough evidence to go on to convict him. I mean, that's really all they had. He was the person that was last seen with her. He made inconsistent statements, and cadaver dogs alerted in his room. Everything else can sort of be explained away or is not strong enough to really make the case, which I do appreciate that they did not rush into any charges because people do not understand that if you try someone and you don't have enough evidence and they are found not guilty,
that's it.
You're done. Like, you don't get a second shot.
Yeah.
So the fact that they took their time to compile evidence was critical.
Yeah. I also didn't realize when you said you were going to do this case that this happened in the late 90s. I really didn't know. It's amazing to me that in 2022 we are getting, which I don't know the verdict, so this is crazy, but that in 2022 we're finally getting at least a legal answer. And this happened, why do I do math?
26 years.
26 years ago. Wow.
Yeah. It's unusual too to see resolution to a case that old. Especially she disappeared. Mostly without a trace, but we'll get into that. On September 25th, 2019, Orchid resident Chris Lambert launched the Your Own Backyard podcast, which generated massive public interest in and outside of San Luis Obispo County, which police said led to additional witnesses and information.
Sorry, I'm very, very invested. I didn't know that.
It's fascinating.
Wow.
In 2019, several new witnesses were interviewed, which led to sheriff's detectives securing a court order to intercept and monitor Paul Flores' cell phone and text messages. Also in January 2020, the police heard a wiretapped phone call between Paul and Susan. Susan said, "Another thing I need you to do is to start listening to the podcast to see where we can punch holes in it, wherever we can punch holes. Maybe we can't. You're the one that can tell me." Paul did not respond to that sentence.
I have so many goosebumps. Oh my God.
Paul Flores must have felt the walls closing in at that point. On January 29th, 2020, the sheriff's office announced that since 2011, it had served 18 search warrants, conducted physical evidence searches at 9 locations, submitted 37 evidence items from the early days of the case for modern DNA testing, recovered 140 new items of evidence, including 2 trucks that belonged to members of the Flores family in 1996, conducted 91 in-person interviews, wrote 364 supplemental reports related to the case, and spent approximately $62,000 in investigative expenses during this time.
I wish I had an applause button.
Yeah.
Here,
oh my gosh. Good for them.
Wow.
They were working this case. It's amazing too to keep that spark alive for people to just not say, we've reached the end, we can't bring this case to fruition.
I'd like to thank Paul for making it so frustrating and obvious that it's driving us to get that kind of evidence.
Mm-hmm. On February 5th, 2020, almost 24 years after Kristin disappeared, 4 search warrants were simultaneously served in San Luis Obispo County, Los Angeles County, and the state of Washington. This is a feat that they seamlessly organized this to prevent the destruction of evidence between the family members. These warrants were simultaneously served on the homes of Paul, Ruben, Susan, and Irma Linda Thomas, which was Paul's sister. Investigators took away bags of evidence from Paul's house, including bottles of tramadol and Flexeril, which they deemed date rape drugs. They also took cell phones and computers from the homes. 4 days after the February 2020 search, a neighbor of Ruben Flores said that a cargo trailer was backed up along the side of his house. A fence had to be removed to give the cargo trailer access to the backyard. Susan Flores and her boyfriend, Mike McConville, were present and agitated and stayed the entire night, which had never happened before. The trailer blocked the view of anything going on in the backyard. It was so weird that the woman took pictures of it.
I was just going to say, Gremlins take pictures and videos of stuff. Again, go neighbor.
She took pictures of it. On April 22nd, 2020, another search warrant was served to search Paul Flores' home again. Aerial footage showed green tents and a slew of law enforcement outside of his home. The warrant was sealed, but the police were looking for specific items. The police conducted another search of Ruben's backyard on March 15th and 16th, 2021. They brought in cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar like they had at the Branch Street property. The ground-penetrating radar showed a 6-foot by 4-foot anomaly under the deck of the house, about the shape of a grave. The cadaver dogs also showed a notable change of behavior in that area. Let me just explain this deck for a second, too. It is a high deck, and there is lattice that is blocking anything underneath the deck, and it's sort of on a slope, so someone can go under there and stand. Like, it's a large area that they're talking about. We will post pictures of that area. An archaeologist dug under the deck, and about 2.5 feet below the surface, they noted dark staining consistent with stains left behind when a body decomposes, which they called a cadaver soak stain.
Ooh.
The archaeologist said the area was consistent with a human burial site where the body was wrapped in a tarp or something similar, where fluids could seep into the soil, but hair, bones, clothes, and other pieces remained contained until dug up and removed. They took plenty of soil samples from this area. Police also seized Mike McConville's cargo trailer that was parked on the side of Ruben's house. They tested it using Blue Star, which is like luminol and glows bright blue when in contact with blood. The report noted that an area on the floor of the cargo trailer lit up like a Christmas tree.
That was the phrase that was in my head, that exact phrasing.
Notably, bleach can also cause a false positive with Blue Star, but that could be just as significant since the trailer was filthy and only one large spot lit up.
And you'd use bleach to clean something real thoroughly.
You would. On April 13th, 2021, after almost 25 years, 45-year-old Paul Flores and his father, 80-year-old Ruben Flores, were both arrested in connection with Kristin Smart's disappearance.
Yes.
The next day, the district attorney announced the formal charges. Paul was charged with felony murder of Kristin Smart, alleging that she was killed during the commission of rape or attempted rape, and Ruben was charged as an accessory for helping to hide her body. The district attorney said prosecutors intended to introduce evidence of Paul's past sexual assaults in support of the charges. On April 19th, 2021, both men entered a plea of not guilty. The warrants included information that was not previously made known to the public. The probable cause warrant for Ruben's arrest included information that the district attorney's file included a note quoted from Paul's former defense attorney, which said, "I just want to say one thing, and I shouldn't even be saying this, but if you'll come to me with an offer of an involuntary with only one condition, and that is that he'll take law enforcement to the body, then I can make that deal happen."
I don't think I've ever been so on the edge of my seat in a case, because I just want you to flip to the end of that note packet and tell me the verdict.
You should thank their jury for coming to a conclusion today, because I would have left you in suspense.
Oh my God.
Paul's defense team requested a change of venue from San Luis Obispo due to the extensive publicity surrounding the case. Judge Van Brooyen granted the request and had the matter transferred to Salinas in Monterey County in April 2022, which is about 140 miles north of San Luis Obispo. In August 2021, a preliminary hearing was held for both men, which is a hearing in which the state presents evidence and arguments in support of the charges, and the court makes a finding whether there's enough evidence to hold the defendants over for trial. Preliminary hearings usually take 1 hour to a few days. The Flores' preliminary hearing lasted 22 days and covered the testimony of 31 witnesses. In the end, the judge determined there was enough evidence to hold them over. Ruben, who was 80 years old and faced a maximum of 3 years if convicted, was sent home with an ankle monitor. Paul's attorney, Robert Sanger, asked for Paul to be released pending trial, but the judge declined.
Good.
Paul faced a sentence of 25 years to life if convicted of first-degree murder.
Ignoring the fact that he's already had, 25 years to just
Right.
live his life and do whatever. Creep on more girls, women.
That is exactly what he did. Ugh. Prior to trial, the prosecutor, Christopher Pavrell, tried to bring 2 rape charges against Paul, which the judge declined to do. Records related to that motion were unsealed and revealed that 29 women told investigators about Paul's history of sexual misconduct, including at least 4 rapes.
Oh my gosh.
According to the prosecutor, Paul would linger at parties or bars near closing time, slip a drug into a woman's drink, and then convince the impaired woman to come to his house.
Oh my God, he drugged her. Because I'm just making that connection right now because people at the party said she didn't seem that intoxicated. She didn't smell like she had been drinking, but then she was
Couldn't walk.
Yeah.
Yep.
The woman would wake up with no recollection. The prosecutor was not allowed to bring the charges, but was allowed to admit propensity evidence, which I will discuss. The actual criminal trial started in Salinas in Monterey County on July 18th, 2022. Paul and Ruben were tried together, but each defendant had their own jury. In California, this is usually done in cases where statements made by one defendant can implicate another defendant in a crime. So 2 juries were pooled and impaneled for the trial.
Interesting.
California also does this really amazing thing where jurors can submit questions for the witnesses and the attorneys review them with the judge, and then they choose questions to ask of the witnesses, which I think is amazing because I can imagine that jurors have questions for witnesses that aren't asked. They may be completely irrelevant, but in their mind it matters and they want an answer. And it might matter to them during their deliberations.
Yeah.
So just to get an answer to any question, small, big or small, is incredible.
And it's reviewed by people. And wow.
Right. Because there are some questions that can't be asked or they're outside the scope or they're irrelevant, so they don't ask them. But I thought that was I think that's so great.
That's great.
So Paul was charged with felony murder. So if a person kills someone during the commission of a felony, that person may be guilty of felony murder even if the death was unintentional, accidental, or negligent. So attempted rape of an intoxicated person, if it led to that person's death, qualifies as felony murder.
Oh, brilliant for them to choose that to indict him with.
Yep. And Ruben was charged with accessory to murder after the fact, which means that they would have to prove that Paul committed a felony, that Ruben knew Paul committed a felony, and that after the felony was committed, Ruben aided him with the intention of protecting him from the consequences. So I won't go through everything we've already discussed in the trial, but because a lot of the stuff we discussed was introduced, but I will discuss highlights from the trial and new information that came out during the process. And again, if you want a deep dive into the case, Chris Lambert did a week-by-week recap of the trial in a special edition of Your Own Backyard called The People versus Flores. And this all happened super recently, so I did my best to expedite my review of everything and pull the best information, and I was just lost in his Twitter feed, and I wish I could include every single fact, but I cannot, so I just went for the juicy stuff. The state's theory of the case was simple. Paul Flores murdered Kristin Smart and buried her under the deck of his father's home. The defense did their best to poke holes in the state's case. Paul's attorney had initially tried to pin the murder on someone else. Strangely enough, Scott Peterson, who was convicted of killing his pregnant wife, was a Cal Poly student at the time.
Oh my gosh, they were like, well, he killed one woman, therefore he had to have killed 2 people. Logic.
Pretty much.
Wow.
The judge did not allow arguments concerning alternate suspects unless there was some evidence of their involvement. So those arguments didn't really go anywhere. They also tried the same defense that Richard Crafts used. There's no body, so there's no evidence of murder.
I was wondering if that was going to come up. Yep.
The prosecutor argued to the jury that a body is not required to find someone guilty of murder, so why reward someone for successfully concealing evidence?
Seriously.
Yeah.
In terms of new information, there was testimony from witnesses that painted a picture of Paul taking an interest in Kristin even before the Kappa Chi party. There was testimony from a Cal Poly student that on at least one occasion, Paul was in Kristin's dorm room and she looked uncomfortable. She was too nice to tell him to go away. He would hang out in Muir Hall late at night, even though he didn't live there, and people in the dorm were weirded out by Paul, including Kristin.
Ugh. Guys, be mean, be a bitch. Who cares? Say no, kick the guy out.
Right. There was another witness, Jennifer Hudson, who had some bombshell information. Jennifer testified that she met Paul in the summer of '96 at a backyard skate ramp when she was 17 years old.
Quick question. Was this before or after American Idol?
I think this was before American Idol.
All right, thanks.
Jennifer's boyfriend was a skater who was using the skate ramp at the time, and Jennifer was sitting on a backyard patio couch with Paul and another person. The group heard an announcement on the radio concerning Kristin's case. Jennifer said Paul looked at them and deadpan said, "That bitch was a dick tease. I was done playing with her." Then he said he either put her or buried her under his ramp in Wasna.
That, I don't know if that'll pick up on the microphone, but that was my hands hitting the table because I just cannot handle this case and his audacity.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer said there was no hint that he was joking. She said she didn't tell law enforcement because she was a scared 17-year-old. She testified that when she saw Paul again a few weeks later, she was so disturbed that she was physically ill. Mm-hmm. Jennifer had not told anyone what Paul had said to her until a drunken conversation with her roommate Justin in 2002. Justin actually submitted anonymous tips about that conversation, which Jennifer didn't know about. When the Your Own Backyard podcast came out, Justin encouraged her to share the information with Chris Lambert, which she did before going to speak to investigators. The defense worked hard to discredit Jennifer by bringing up prior drug use and her supposed involvement with a motorcycle gang.
Come on.
You gotta go. You gotta go with the only thing I have.
Okay. Jennifer's character is not what's on trial, and that's what frustrates me when people try to discredit the witnesses. Like it's not her that is on trial right now.
Not to mention, you can be in a gang and still witness something,
right?
You can.
Just saying.
Justin also testified and confirmed that Jennifer had shared that information with him. He said he had reported the information anonymously to the FBI, a website called Son of Susan, and to the San Luis Obispo Sheriff's Office in 2019. It's about 23 minutes from Wasna to Arroyo Grande, and Ruben Flores lived in Arroyo Grande, so not quite sure why Paul would have said that she was under the ramp in Wasna. I assume it's because he was using MapQuest.
You know what? I bet you're right.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. I think so.
So nobody has a property in Wasna in the family?
No.
Okay.
Weird.
Angela Butler, a senior forensic DNA analyst at the Serological Research Institute in Richmond, testified for several days at trial. She testified that the soil taken from under Ruben Flores' deck in 2021 tested positive for the presence of human blood, but it was too old and degraded to yield a DNA sample. Notably, the test she used would also show positive if there was ferret blood or primate blood present.
Two very specific animals that they can test for.
Correct.
Does that mean we are closely related to ferrets? I'm going to go with no based on your reaction.
I know we're closely related to primates. I haven't heard that about ferrets, but you know.
They're in the skunk family. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
I am in the skunk family. There was no evidence found at Ruben's house to indicate that there were ferrets or primates involved.
I also wonder how much, it depends on how much they took for a sample, but I would think that certainly a ferret produces a lot less blood, but even depending on the primate, probably also produces a lot less blood.
So the prosecutor argued that it would have to be a ferret from Jurassic Park to produce the blood stain that was in the soil.
It's literally a mass burial ground of ferrets.
So he's actually a ferret serial killer?
Yes.
Okay.
They're very prone to cancer. So he just has very bad luck with all these ferrets passing away.
Is that a fact or you're just
No,
making
it's
that
real.
up?
I went to school with somebody who had ferrets when I was young. And
my brother has ferrets. Had. Well, there you go.
Not anymore. He
They
doesn't.
passed away. So yeah, no evidence of Jurassic Park ferrets under Ruben's deck.
What about primates?
No evidence of those either.
Okay.
During trial, defense attorneys asked to confirm that there would be no way to know whether the positive samples were from human blood, ferret blood, or primate blood. The prosecutor said in his closing argument, I loved it so much I had to put it in, I was waiting for evidence of the Flores family ferret farm. Yes. I was waiting for evidence of the Flores family gorilla sanctuary. But we didn't get that evidence because it is 100% beyond any doubt human blood.
Yes.
Yep. I love the prosecution in this case. They're amazing.
Yep. But that's, in all seriousness, that's the point. Reasonable doubt.
Right.
Right.
Aliens could come down to Earth and do blah, blah, blah. That's not reasonable doubt.
You can have doubt, but to say that it was a prehistoric ferret is not reasonable doubt.
No, seriously.
Angela Butler also tested the spot on the mattress cover from Paul's dorm room. The spot tested positive for blood. She tried to get a DNA sample, and she was able to say that multiple individuals contributed to the sample, including a male, but she could neither include nor exclude Paul or Kristin from the DNA profile, so that didn't really add anything to evidence.
Maybe if we had gotten it within days of her going missing, that would have helped.
His sheets, and maybe if the room wasn't cleaned.
Yep.
Another forensic scientist testified that the same soil samples contained fibers that were red and black, the same colors as the clothes Kristin last wore before she disappeared. The state was permitted to call 2 women as witnesses who testified about sexual assaults perpetrated by Paul Flores to demonstrate that he had a propensity for that behavior, because the state alleged that Kristin's death occurred during a rape or an attempted rape. I'm going to explain their testimony and additional evidence found by the police, so trigger warning for sexual assault. At trial, Rhonda Doe testified that she was at a Redondo Beach bar in 2007 or 2008. She left her drink unattended to go out for a cigarette. When she returned, she finished her drink and blacked out. She woke up in a strange house, completely naked.
Oh my God.
She went to the hospital and a rape kit was taken. A swab taken from her vagina was matched to Paul Flores' DNA 5 years later. The district attorney never prosecuted based upon insufficient information.
I realize that's not the point of this episode, but that is infuriating.
Yep.
Another woman, who they called Sarah Doe, was out at a bar in San Pedro in 2011. She said that she was hanging out with a group of her friends, and she noticed that Paul kept staring at them. Her friends would go outside for a cigarette, and they left their drinks unattended. Paul eventually approached them, and they were engaged in friendly conversation. She said at some point, a fight broke out, and they all ran out into Sarah's car, including Paul. She said it's foggy after that, and she doesn't remember how her friend got home. She remembers being parked outside of Paul's house and seeing a white car and a lot of bushes. She said she had 4 to 5 drinks over 4 hours, and that she doesn't normally lose her memory like that. She said Paul gave her something else to drink when she got there, but she doesn't think it was alcoholic. The rest of the night, she was in and out of consciousness. She said she remembers flashes of Paul on top of her, and there was a lot of penetration.
Oh, no.
At one point, she wanted to take a shower to try to wake herself up, and he went with her and continued the penetration. Oh. She said he also tried to put a ball gag on her, and she was screaming. Oh. She said someone else was there talking to him, too. She said he finally gave up, and when she woke up in the morning, she said to him, when someone says no, it means no.
Good for her.
She said Paul hung his head down in shame and said, okay. Ugh. Sarah Doe didn't report it initially because she was just so confused about the whole incident. She did try to report it a few years later, but they just kept asking her questions that she didn't know the answer to, so she gave up.
That's awful.
A little aside, in the beginning of trial, the prosecutor showed the jury a video clip taken from a tape filmed in June of '96 at a party immediately following Arroyo Grande's high school graduation. The video showed a mother teasing her son's friend. She turned the camera to Paul, who was sitting at a table and laughing. She said, "What about you, Paul? Are we going to see you walk at Cal Poly in 4 years?" Paul laughed and said, "No way." Another guy said, "Walking into court, maybe." The mother asked, "What do you know about that missing girl? What did you do with her, Paul?" Paul said nothing. His smile faded, and he looked down at the table, hanging his head, just like he did when Sarah Doe told him no means no.
Oh my God. I wonder, I don't know if we'll talk about this at all, but I wonder if it seems like he was a different person when he drank. And that, to be extremely clear, that is not an excuse for him, but I wonder if that explains some of his behavior on being so aggressive and doing all the things he did. And then the next morning reacting in almost, I don't know that remorseful is accurate, but in kind of a shameful way. I wonder if it has something to do with his drinking.
I think even sober, he was a predator.
Yeah, I think he's a piece of shit. So,
Yeah, I don't have real nice.
I don't know.
I don't have real nice things to say about him.
No. I think that I will quit this podcast depending on the answer at the end of this. So.
We're getting there. We're on page 14.
Yeah.
The prosecutor made clear in argument that Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe's testimony only has to prove it is more likely than not that Paul Flores raped them. Their assaults did not have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt for jurors to consider them as evidence. If the jury believed that just one of the two rapes occurred, they could conclude that Paul was inclined to commit sexual offenses generally and did commit rape in this case. Both Sarah Doe and Rhonda Doe testified that Paul used a red ball gag to rape them. The state presented the testimony of Christopher Fitzpatrick, who's a computer forensic specialist with the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office. He was tasked with getting digital evidence from Paul's computer, which was seized in February 2020. By agreement, a still photograph was taken from a video found on Paul's computer. It was a close-up of a woman's face with a red ball gag and black straps around her head. The photo was shown to the jury only as evidence that Paul owned a red ball gag.
Okay, so it actually was a photo that he himself had taken. It wasn't.
It was a still taken from a video
that he
himself had taken.
No, I thought the same thing, that maybe it was like porn or something on his computer.
Oh, no. Going right into that, the jurors were not told that Paul's computer also contained numerous homemade pornographic videos which showed Paul digitally penetrating, sodomizing, and having sexual intercourse with unconscious females in a folder titled Practice.
I'm sorry. I'm having a really hard time controlling my body during reacting to this. Both Colby and I are like physically clenching our fists. I'm infuriated again with him as a human because he has gotten away with this so far, that he would
For
have
years.
That he would just even think of doing that to another human being. And then, I'm so angry. I will lose my mind at the end of this podcast.
This is one of those nature things. I mean, you hear about this. He was bad to the bone.
Yep.
Like, he was just born to do this. This is just, he has a propensity for this behavior. Couldn't stop himself. I mean, you almost got caught in 96, 97. Like, it was close call, and you just continued this behavior.
Yep. And I also, like, just based on the limited behavior we've heard from his parents, I don't feel surprised. I would love to know their backgrounds, because I'm just thinking of Susan sending back, sending back the pictures of Kristin. Like, you're a piece of shit too. And this entire thing is so infuriating, and I cannot imagine. We haven't talked really besides that about Kristin's parents, but if I'm infuriated, I cannot imagine how they were feeling during this and just having to wait this long. Anyway.
Just, this wasn't in my notes, but just a little piece about Kristin's parents. I said, it must have been so hard. They were going on a wild goose chase. In the Your Own Backyard podcast, there were a lot of like psychics and mediums who called in with information about where they thought Kristin's body was. And Kristin's father went to all these locations to check all of them out to see if he could find her. So, I mean, they were just
everything
desperate for answers.
Every lead.
Desperate for answers.
That's so hard. And I hope those people were well-intentioned. Like,
I'm sure they were.
I hope some of them truly believed what they were telling him, and it wasn't just like, oh, this is my chance for 15 minutes of fame.
Right.
Yeah. Ugh.
The LAPD has open investigations concerning some of the potential rape victims that have come forward and are depicted in those videos that were on Paul's computer. They also found numerous pornographic videos and pictures of children under 18 engaged in adult behaviors. Based upon the pornographic material on his computer, the police and the state concluded that Paul appears to be obsessed with sexual content involving under the influence and intoxicated females. There was testimony that Ruben was very protective of his backyard, and especially the area under the deck, which was shielded by that lattice work. He'd called a plumber once for a repair, which he canceled when he found out that they would need to go under the deck. He had a tenant that lived in the house for 10 years who was not allowed under the deck. Ruben found that the tenant had placed barrels under the deck at one point, and he flipped out. Paul's ex-girlfriend was at the house one day in the backyard, and both Ruben and Paul ushered her away from the deck as quickly as possible. The state also presented evidence from a search warrant that was executed in May 2021. The police went to Ruben's house to obtain a buccal swab. The warrant was also intended to obtain buccal swabs from Susan and Mike McConville.
Like a belt buckle?
No. It's a fancy term. It's basically a DNA swab with like a fancy Q-tip. Like in the mouth. It's called a buccal swab.
Why?
It's probably someone's last name.
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just imagining them going around the closets like, oh, let me get your
not a belt buckle.
Okay.
Nope, a DNA swab with a fancy Q-tip.
Why that was so relevant. Okay. Thank you.
Ruben answered the door, and there was a table blocking the doorway so that the police could not enter, so basically he knew they were coming. Ruben was given a copy of the search warrant to review, and he asked why they were going to take samples from Susan and Mike. The jury was handed transcripts of Ruben's comment. He said, "Well, they haven't committed no felonies, only me."
Thank you, Ruben. Appreciate ya.
Then he corrected himself and said, I mean, I'm the only one that's been arrested.
Mm-hmm. That too.
They haven't committed murder. No, that's not. He didn't murder. Ignore that.
The officer collecting the swab said that Ruben appeared concerned after he made that statement.
As he should.
At the close of the state's case, the defense moved for a judgment of acquittal. They argued there was no evidence of a murder or a rape. Ruben's attorney argued a hole in the ground is not evidence, and there was no DNA evidence to corroborate the arguments. The state argued against the motion, citing to the totality of evidence presented thus far. Ruben's lawyer argued that there's no evidence that Kristin is dead. He said, for all we know, she's in Dubai.
That is where missing women tend to go. They just start a new life for themselves in Dubai. It's very affordable.
The motion for judgment of acquittal was denied.
Oh, okay, good.
The defense called some of their own experts to try to rebut the state's evidence. They called Dr. David Carter, who was designated as an expert in human decomposition. He reviewed photos of the area below Ruben's deck and the hemoglobin test results. Dr. Carter said he didn't see anything in the data that confirmed the presence of human remains. The state said in their closing argument, duh. He literally said, this is not legal terminology, but duh.
Amazing.
Like, they moved it.
That's one of those wordsmithing moments.
Yeah.
Cannot confirm the presence of human remains because the body was moved. Mm-hmm. They also tried to counter the test results from the blood found in the soil samples. They presented a forensic scientist that said the test was not designed to find blood in soil and that multiple studies showed the blood would be too degraded after 4 weeks. But that turned out to be blood that was exposed to the elements, not buried 6 feet under the ground. A few investigators were called in the defense's case as well as by the state in rebuttal before both sides rested. Closing arguments began at the beginning of October. The state told the jury that justice delayed does not have to be justice denied. Assistant District Attorney Pavrell argued that there is no doubt that Kristin Smart is dead because she had plans that weekend. She would not have left her family. Several people testified that Paul basically targeted Kristin prior to the Crandall Way party, and Paul's statement that he had no idea who Kristin was a bald-faced lie. Mm-hmm. No witnesses saw Kristin drinking at the party, but she was clearly incapacitated. Paul's MO is to target women at the end of a social function to take advantage of them. Paul pushed Cheryl to leave him with Kristin, and when Cheryl left them, they were just yards away from Kristin's dorm. To believe Paul's story, you would have to believe that everyone was in a conspiracy to convict Paul. Thousands rallied to find Kristin. Paul and Ruben did not. When Paul's girlfriend went into Ruben's backyard, she was whisked away from that area. When investigators searched Ruben's house in 2020, they found a treasure trove of Kristin Smart paraphernalia, a collection of someone with a perverse obsession with her. A tenant heard Ruben call Kristin a dirty slut, an odd thing to say about someone he never met. The state also went through the cadaver dog evidence, the ground-penetrating anomaly under Ruben's deck, the soil staining, and the subsequent positive tests for human blood. The only logical conclusion is that both defendants are guilty. The defense attorneys for Paul and Ruben both leaned on the arguments that there is insufficient evidence of a crime. Paul's attorney said that conspiracy theories are fun, but that's all it was. He said that the podcaster and a Facebook posse had it out to see Paul convicted. He said the publicity is the elephant in the room and that the extensive news coverage had an influence on a lot of testimony.
Do you think that the defense attorney really believed that? Or was he just doing his job? Because that really kills me. I know that everyone has to do their job and everyone has the right to an attorney, but that really kills me.
There's really no way to know.
I know.
Because you only get that feel when you know the defendant and when you've talked to them. So, I mean, he's just doing his job.
It's his job to defend and argue based on the law. I actually don't think based on what his client did or didn't do. Like, they're there to uphold the law.
You're right. It actually reminds me of our last episode's discussion, because something that I've seen a lot in cases that I've listened to is things get argued on technicalities. And I understand why that happens, but it also feels like it's not really using the law the way it was intended. I don't think that's the case here at all. I think he's just defending what he can. But anyway.
But the crux of his argument was that it is not Paul's burden to prove that he didn't commit the crime.
Yeah, that's true.
It is the state's burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Paul killed Kristin during the commission of a rape or an attempted rape.
Well, fortunately, that's very clear. But it's true.
Or
You're
is
right.
it?
You're right.
He also argued that Kristin was engaged in at-risk behavior, making out with men at a party. She wasn't the angel that they portrayed her to be. In all of their searches, they never found a body. Ruben's lawyer argued that it's not entirely unlikely that Kristin is still alive somewhere. She was not under Ruben's deck, and he never dug a hole in his life. He was
Not me, never.
never dug a hole.
Not a felony. Nope.
He's a good man who's never committed a crime in his life. The case was turned over to Paul's jury on October 4th at 3 p.m. Ruben's jury began deliberations on October 5th around 1:45 p.m. On October 13th, one of Ruben's jurors had to be excused for discussing the case with his priest. An alternate juror was sworn in at 2:45. On 10/17, around 11:40 in the morning, Ruben's jury confirmed that they had reached a verdict. The sealed verdict was given to the judge, and the jury was excused and asked to remain on call. On 10/18, which is today, around noon, Paul Flores' jury had reached a verdict, and the court scheduled the verdicts to be read at 1:30 after lunch.
Could you read any more slowly?
I am waiting.
Paul's verdict.
Oh my God, you're doing. Read it faster.
Paul's verdict was read first.
In dramatic fashion. Laura and I are thrashing.
Okay, listen. I had to sit there refreshing that page, waiting for the updates. 1:22 p.m. People are milling into the courtroom.
How do you think I felt when I got the Reddit notification?
Paul's verdict was read first. Paul Flores' jury found him guilty.
Yes!
Of first-degree murder, putting an end to a case that was unsolved for 26 years.
Oh, I want to send every juror a fruit basket.
Ruben's verdict was read next. Ruben Flores' jury found him not guilty.
I'm actually kind of more okay with that because I don't think that they've really proven that Ruben helped him. They've more kind of proven that Paul used Ruben's property to dispose of the body or for safekeeping. So I'm more okay with that.
Wow.
But it must have just been that there was a doubt that Ruben knew enough about it.
I can see that.
His statement was super sketchy.
Yeah.
And also the testimony from the neighbor who saw them with the trailer in the backyard and heard them yelling. I personally feel that he knew about it and that both of the parents were protecting their son.
Also wonder if, like, I don't know who the jurors were, but like if some percentage of them were parents themselves, maybe it's possible that they were like, you know, I would do anything to help my kid out in this situation. Like, I don't really have proof, but like I kind of understand. And then we come back to he's 81, so like, what's it really going to mean for him to go to jail for 3? You know, like, is anybody going to be happy there? But I'm with Laura. Fuck Paul on this. And him looking at Paul, he's probably, is he in his like 40s?
40.
Yeah, Paul's 46.
He's in his 40s right now. Like, there are probably people there that can see him as the predator versus looking at like an older gentleman kind of thinking, you know, like just looking at them in current state.
And they did, that was part of it too. They showed the pictures. They said, do not forget that this was 26 years ago. The people that you see sitting at these defense tables are not the people that are charged with these crimes. And they showed the driver's license picture of Ruben 26 years prior. And they showed the mugshot of Paul when he was younger too, just to try to remind the jury, like, I mean, Ruben looks old. He was like listening to the testimony with headphones on. So, you know, he's 81.
Yeah, I think it's just a service to society that Paul was found guilty because obviously it was for this specifically, but he's clearly someone who should not be allowed to interact with anyone.
Right.
So
they
put him away.
They were holding a press conference tonight, I think after we started recording, so I did not get to listen to that. I know the assistant district attorney had also asked the judge about the bounds of the gag order and whether or not they would be able to talk about pieces of the case with the public, and she was going to review that, but she was inclined to leave it in place until the sentencing.
I was just going to ask about that.
Which makes sense. So we'll have to do an update when their sentence is sort of like what happened with debate where we had the verdict but not the sentencing.
Yep. Because it was a potential of 25 years to
25 years to life.
Yeah. 25 minimum. Okay. Well,
I feel like they're not going to give him life based on the evidence. I feel like it'll be a number.
I don't know.
Probably. But I mean, he's also lived out in society for 26 years.
And committed more crimes that I realize are not on, it's not part of this, but.
Right.
But that's the problem that I have. If they only would have been able to do this sooner, and I get Marina's point that, like, you get one shot to bring them to trial here, and, like, if you can't prove it, like, that's it. They could go around and basically say, I did this, and there's no consequence. But like, how many other women suffered at Paul's hands because he had these 26 years to keep creeping on people?
Right. I have a question for you guys though. Like, what do you think? What is up with the Branch Street property and the garbage can and the concrete and the watch? Like, it seems to me that based on the evidence that was presented at trial, there were also questions about whether a body or a truck could be backed up to Paul's dorm room window. So I think the theory is that Kristin went to Paul's dorm room. She died in the dorm room. He got her out through the window into a vehicle. And then she was buried in Ruben's, under his deck until that February search when they were like, we need to move her body. And they did. But the watch alarm is so weird, and the earring. So I was trying to think if maybe they hid pieces of evidence at the other property to try, like, if anything ever happened.
That was my first thought, is just getting rid of things.
What property was closer to the dorm room? Because is it possible that Kristin was moved to the Branch Street property for like a holding period, essentially, until they could actually get her to his dad's house to bury her under the deck?
Maybe. I know that Ruben's property was about 12 miles from campus. I'm not sure I'm not sure how far the Branch Street property was.
So it's either that or what Laura said, like it's, or maybe you even said it, Marina, like it's possible they just put some of the evidence over there. So it's like no one, like not everything is in a single place if somebody were to stumble upon it.
Right.
Especially if the Branch Street property was one that got rented out to tenants.
It was, yeah.
Just an earring is not really much of a thing. A watch buried in the backyard, like it could have been an accident. Like, you know, it just could have fallen off your hand and over time.
It also could have been a coincidence. It could have been not her watch.
Right.
It could, you know, like I'm very confident Paul is guilty, but that kind of thing could have been coincidence and not related.
Susan rented out the property, but Chris Lambert made the point that Susan and Ruben were in these areas in California. They were known. People had theories and they were harassed. People sent them postcards. People sent them mail. And it was like, do you love that area so much that you're willing to stay in these properties? Or
They couldn't leave the property.
yes, do you have to stay at the properties because you're protecting
Something's
something?
there.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very valid point.
So, question. We still haven't officially found Kristin's body, right?
No.
Now, does this conviction allow any further... Does this conviction allow any further exploration or anything that we can... Or I wonder if Paul will lead them to the body now or any kind of... Because I realize it's closure. I think that Kristin's family is very aware that she is unfortunately not with us anymore, but I wonder if there could be some closure.
It would be nice
Yeah.
if Paul told them where the body was or Ruben, but and Ruben could actually tell them where the body was.
Oh.
And it wouldn't, you know, he's already been tried for that, but Paul is going to appeal.
Of course.
I mean, he's going to have his appeal, so the case is going to be ongoing. And you're not going to lead them to the body because then you're just admitting guilt.
Isn't that so frustrating? Because it, you know, I literally cheered when you said that he was found guilty, but it's not the end of the story.
No.
I feel vindicated that he was found guilty, but it's equally infuriating that he can appeal.
I think his attorney made 9 motions for mistrial during the trial.
I mean, what else do you have to go on?
Right. So, I mean, and they will file a motion for judgment notwithstanding the verdict and saying that there was insufficient evidence for the jury to convict. And, you know, because it's all based on circumstantial evidence, so they can do that. But the jury has the right to credit the testimony of the witnesses. That's within their power as fact finders. So, yeah, wow. I'm just glad that when I finished my notes yesterday, I said, so bad news. Paul's jury is still deliberating, so I do not have a resolution to the trial for you, but they came through with a guilty verdict.
Oh my gosh. Could you imagine if you only told us that Ruben was not guilty? I'm pretty sure Laura would have flipped this table.
Yeah. Well, they didn't, so they were not reading they had to read the verdicts together. And I think the reason for that would be if Paul was not guilty of the murder, then I don't know how Ruben could be found
that is
guilty.
Such an interesting dynamic.
Circular reference.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought.
But I don't know if that would stand. Like, we don't have 2 juries like that in Connecticut, so I don't know how that would work. But if the state presented sufficient evidence for Ruben to be found guilty, I still think it would stand even if Paul was found not guilty.
Would that affect Paul's guiltiness? Wouldn't that be interesting?
What do you mean?
Like if Ruben was found guilty, would that affect and imply that Paul had to also be guilty?
Well, that's why there's 2 juries. Right. And they didn't hear the same evidence too. There were times where Paul's jury was excused at the point when they introduced the testimony that Ruben said, I'm the one that committed the felony.
That being said, we've heard me misspeak all throughout this podcast.
Right.
So I have a little sympathy for that part where I would say something like that and be like, no, I didn't commit the murder. No, definitely not. Yep.
So, guys, that was Kristin Smart.
Wow.
Thank you so much for covering that case and educating us on it. Because like I said, I'd started to hear the name and I really didn't know anything. And I'm just really happy that we discussed it. And I'm happy that there's some form of closure. I know he's going to appeal it, but I'm going to hope that nothing fruitful comes of the appeals for him, and hopefully he leads people to the body in exchange for a reduced sentence.
That would
be
the
only
good.
thing I can think of.
Yeah, maybe.
I think I'm going to go listen to that podcast because I am fascinated.
It's just so
good.
It's so well done.
Listen. Yeah.
And I meant to mention this before, you know, he was live tweeting a lot of the trial. He had a media pass and he was providing the information and summarizing the arguments. And when he commented on the verdicts today, a lot of people were commenting like they actually are not sure whether this case would have come to a conclusion without his podcast.
That I saw.
Like
Amazing.
he really brought attention back to it. You know, people were listening to it, and it almost made it easier for people who were afraid of the police or who were afraid of Paul or the Flores family to come forward. He was sort of a buffer for this information. So more information came forward, and, you know, maybe things would have heated up on their own without it, but it's sort of like they were working so hard. Things were leading up to 2020. It's like the podcast came out in 2019 and like, boom, you have all these search warrants. You have, you know, the arrests in 2021. So
wow.
Podcasts are powerful.
Yeah, I have a dream of us being able to do that. I know we're just a little baby podcast now, but that would be amazing because people deserve to have justice. Even if we don't solve something or bring something through like that, it is still worth it to tell someone's story.
Right.
And something that might not have gotten such attention on the news or something like that. I think, you know, that is something we can contribute even if we aren't uncovering new evidence.
And you know what's interesting is as this trial is going on right now, I'm not getting local alerts on this. This is not getting national attention. No. I've been keeping an eye on the verdict, and Colby actually messaged me and said, did you know that there's a verdict in this case? And I said, on the father, but not the son. And then you sent me the link to it. So, I mean, there's not even national coverage right now on her case. Like, so
I had to endure so much of the Depp Heard trial. Like, why did I have to deal with that nonsense? This is what's more important.
Our priorities are skewed.
So skewed.
And what's out there that we don't know that's happening right now. So.
And I, back on your point you were making, like, we're a little baby podcast. We'll probably never solve anything. I will say I have not stopped thinking about Sammy since we did that episode. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of her and her story. And if there's at least one other person out there like me that her stuff stuck with, then I feel like we helped somebody. We made a difference. And like at the end of the day, now I feel like I'm getting very career driven. That's really what motivates me. Like I want to make a difference and I want to help people. And I feel like Chris Lambert, that was a slam dunk. He helped people big time with this.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Guys, if you're enjoying listening to Grimm, please rate and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you don't miss any episodes. If you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, make our day by leaving us a written review. You can find our page on Facebook by searching Grimm: a true crime podcast. If you want to subscribe to our Patreon, you can go to Patreon and search Grimm: a true crime podcast. Follow us on Instagram at Grimm Crime Podcast for information on future episodes and case photos. If you want to send us a case suggestion or just say hi, you can email us at grimmcrimepodcast@gmail.com. Listen, learn, and stay alive until next time, because the future is grim.